A strong young farmer named Amoah faces a cruel twist of fate, a venomous snakebite that changes his life forever. Once loved and respected, he becomes an outcast, labeled evil and cursed by those he trusted most. But this is not a story of defeat. It is a powerful journey of pain, hope, and the unbreakable spirit of a man who rises from despair. The morning sun peeked gently over the horizon, casting a golden glow on the village of Amoah. The air was cool and fresh, filled with the soft chirping of birds and the sweet smell of dew resting on cocoa leaves. It was a peaceful morning, the kind that made you feel alive and hopeful. Amoah stepped outside his small house, his broad shoulders straight and his strong hands ready for a day's work. Each day, from the time he was a boy, Amoah had risen before the sun to tend to the land his family had cared for through generations. Farming was more than just a job for him. It was part of who he was. He hummed a song his father taught him long ago, the melody mixing with the sounds of nature around him. Amanabo, amanabo. Planting time, we will work. Amoah's farm was a patch of green beauty in the village. The cocoa trees were tall and strong, their leaves shiny under the early light. The maize fields waved gently like a golden ocean, and the rich soil smelled of life and promise. To Amoah, the land was a living friend, one that needed care and respect. That morning, after many hours bent over the earth, Amoah rested beneath the shade of a large mango tree. The coolness of the shade was a comfort from the heat of the sun. He closed his eyes and let himself listen to the distant rhythm of drums from a neighboring village. The scent of ripe mangoes filled the air, sweet and heavy. Then, without warning, pain struck his right ankle. It was sharp and burning, like fire beneath his skin. Amoah's eyes snapped open just in time to see a black snake sliding swiftly into the bushes nearby. Panic seized him. His legs stiffened, muscles tightening as the poison began its cruel journey through his body. He dropped his hoe and tried to step back, but his leg no longer obeyed. Sweat poured down his face as fear took hold. "Help! Someone, please!" he called, his voice trembling with desperation. Nearby, a shepherd boy heard his cry and ran toward the village, shouting for help. Within moments, villagers came running with water, herbs, and worried faces. Two strong men carefully lifted Amoah, carrying him toward the small hut of the village herbalist. The herbalist was an old man with deep wrinkles, his eyes sharp despite his age. He was known for his knowledge of roots and healing plants, passed down through many generations. "Quickly," the herbalist commanded, gathering leaves and bark. He chewed some leaves, making a thick green paste, and pressed it onto the swollen bite on Amoah's ankle. He then tied a cloth tightly above the wound, trying to slow the poison's spread. "Pray to the gods," the herbalist said with a grave voice. "This snake's venom is strong. Only the gods can save him now." Amoah lay on a woven mat, burning with fever, shivering in pain. Time slipped slowly between moments of agony and fading consciousness. The villagers stayed close, whispering prayers into the heavy air. The nights were the hardest. Amoah's body felt like it was on fire, yet ice cold at the same time. His breath came shallow, and dreams twisted into fear. Days passed, then a week. Slowly, the fever began to ease. The poison's grip weakened, but its damage was done. Amoah's legs, once strong and steady, no longer worked. He could not stand. He could not walk. The village watched with growing fear and confusion. Their strongest young man was now weak and broken. Amoah's world began to change in ways he never imagined. The village turns away. The slow decline and isolation. The days after Amoah's fall were filled with hope and care. The village of Amoah had always been a close community where neighbors looked after one another, and the strength of one was the strength of all. So when Amoah was struck by the snake's poison, the villagers rallied around him. In the mornings, friends brought warm food, soft fufu, rich palm soup, and sweet fruits picked fresh from the trees. They came with gentle hands and soft words, sitting quietly beside Amoah's bed. Old women sang healing songs, their voices like the gentle wind through the palm leaves. Children brought flowers and colorful beads, hoping their gifts would bring good luck. "Don't worry, Amoah," said Yah, an elderly neighbor. The gods watch over the patient and strong. Amoah wanted to believe her words. Deep in his heart, he dreamed of the day he would rise again, walk through the fields, and feel the sun on his face. But as the weeks passed, the sickness did not fade. The fever came and went like a storm, leaving him weak and trembling. His legs, once steady as the earth itself, now refused to hold his weight. Even moving from one side of his hut to the other required great effort. The villagers began to grow restless. Whispers floated through the air like dry leaves in the wind. "Perhaps he has angered the gods," murmured one man, avoiding Amoah's gaze. "Why does he still lie there? This is no ordinary illness," a woman said, clutching her child tightly. "Stay away," warned an old man with a serious face. "Cursed men bring misfortune. The gods' anger is not to be taken lightly." The warm smiles and kind visits grew fewer. Friends stopped coming. Relatives who once sat by Amoah's side now crossed to the other side of the road to avoid him. Amoah felt the distance between himself and his village grow wider than the fields he once farmed. Days grew longer and lonelier. Hunger gnawed at his belly. The food brought by neighbors became rare. Pride held him inside his hut for as long as he could bear. But soon, the ache of an empty stomach was louder than the ache of shame. One early morning, with a heart heavy but a spirit unwilling to break, Amoah gathered his strength. With trembling hands and aching muscles, he crawled out of his hut and made his way to the roadside. The village looked different to him now. Cold, quiet, and filled with whispers. There, on the red earth, Amoah sat with an old, cracked calabash before him. It was his silent request for mercy, a hope that even the smallest kindness might find its way to him. But the faces that passed were hard and eyes looked away. Children laughed cruelly and threw stones. Mothers pulled their children close, whispering, "Don't look, don't speak to him." Amoah's heart ached. The same people who once greeted him with smiles and blessings now called him evil and cursed. The weight of loneliness was heavier than any poison. Yet inside him, a small flame of hope still flickered. "I will rise again," he whispered. "One day, I will walk tall once more." The days blended into one another as Amoah sat by the roadside, a shadow of the man he once was. The red earth beneath him was dry and cracked, the heat of the sun pressing down without mercy. His clothes, once sturdy and clean, hung in tatters from his thin frame. Dust clung to his skin and tangled in his hair. His hands, rough and calloused from years of farming, now trembled as they rested on the hard ground. The old calabash in front of him, chipped and cracked, was his only companion, waiting for the kindness of strangers who often passed by without a glance. The village around him buzzed with life, but it felt as if Amoah were invisible, or worse, a curse that no one wanted to acknowledge. The laughter of children echoed cruelly in his ears, their voices sharp and full of scorn. Small stones hit the ground near him, some even striking his worn clothes. "Cursed! Evil!" they shouted. "Go away, bad man! Don't touch him! He'll bring misfortune!" Amoah kept his head bowed, not from shame alone, but from the weight of a heart tired of fighting. The words stung deeply, like thorns pressing into soft flesh. Yet, beneath the pain, he held a quiet strength, a stubborn flame that refused to die. Sometimes a traveler, perhaps a merchant or a passing stranger, would slow their step, pause for a moment, and drop a coin or a small piece of bread into his calabash. Those few coins were like drops of water to a dying plant. They gave him life to hold on to. Yet those moments were rare, swallowed by long stretches of empty hands and cold stomachs. One day, a woman from the village, her face lined with worry and compassion, approached slowly. Her steps were careful, and her eyes shone with sympathy. She knelt beside Amoah, her voice soft. "Here, take this," she said, handing him a small wrapped bundle. Inside was a simple meal, rice and beans, wrapped carefully in a clean cloth. For the first time in months, Amoah's heart lifted. His hands shook as he reached toward the food, a flicker of hope warming him. But just as he touched the bundle, a group of children rushed forward. Their faces were hard and fierce, their eyes filled with suspicion and fear. "Don't eat his food," one boy shouted, snatching the bundle from Amoah's hands. "He is cursed. He will bring bad luck to anyone who helps him." The children tore the food apart, scattering it on the dusty ground. Their laughter was cruel and sharp, ringing in Amoah's ears like a bitter song. The sting of rejection was deeper than hunger or thirst. It cut through the very soul. Amoah closed his eyes, swallowing back tears that threatened to spill. He had learned through months of suffering that crying would not soften their hearts. Nightfall brought little relief. When the village slept, the cool night air wrapped around Amoah like a heavy, damp blanket. The stars twinkled faintly above, distant and cold. His thin body shivered against the chill. He curled into himself, trying to hold on to what warmth he could find. The silence around him was broken only by the occasional bark of a dog or the rustle of leaves. Yet inside the quiet darkness of his heart, a small flame burned. It was a flame fed by memories. The loving hands of his mother, the laughter of his childhood friends, the rich smell of wet earth after rain. "I will not be forgotten," he whispered to the night. "I will walk again, I will stand tall. They will see." He thought of the cocoa trees he had planted, the maize fields he had tended. He thought of the dreams he had once held close, now buried beneath the pain and dust. Though his body was broken, his spirit refused to surrender. The man who crawled by the roadside was still inside, waiting for the chance to rise. Days passed in this quiet struggle. Sometimes a kind passerby would offer a gentle word or a small gift, but often, Amoah's world was filled with the harshness of cold shoulders and turned backs. The villagers' fear was like a wall, thick and unyielding. They believed in curses and bad luck, stories passed down for generations. To them, Amoah was a warning, a shadow to avoid. But Amoah knew better. He knew that misfortune could strike anyone, that sickness was no sign of evil. Still, the loneliness was crushing. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the dusty road, Amoah felt a flicker of something new, a strange mixture of sadness and determination. He looked up, watching children play nearby, their faces full of joy and light. "I will not be a ghost to them," he thought. "I will come back. I will live again." He clasped his hands over the calabash and closed his eyes, silently praying for strength and patience. For now, he would wait, but he would never give up. The village of Asuboa was usually quiet in the afternoon heat, but today it buzzed with unusual activity. News had spread that a rich man from the city was coming for a funeral, a rare and important event. Villagers dressed in their best clothes, children ran excitedly through the dusty streets, and the marketplace overflowed with people selling food, cloth, and trinkets. Mr. Bafur arrived in a convoy of shiny cars that sparkled under the bright sun. He was a tall man with an air of confidence and kindness. His white agbada flowed around him like a river of light, and his gold watch caught the eye of everyone nearby. The villagers looked on with mixed feelings. Some admired him quietly. Others whispered rumors about the city man's wealth and power. As Mr. Bafur walked through the village, his eyes moved thoughtfully over the familiar dirt paths, the palm trees swaying gently, and the small huts with their thatched roofs. He had come many times before, but today something different caught his attention. Near the edge of the village, under the glaring sun, he saw a thin figure sitting by the roadside. A man with dusty clothes and tired eyes. It was Amoah, the man everyone had talked about for months, but no one dared to approach. Mr. Bafur stopped, his heart stirred with a feeling he could not explain. He stepped closer, reaching into his pocket and pulling out some money. He bent slightly, ready to offer help, but then a voice cut through the air, low and harsh. "Leave him," whispered a villager standing nearby. "He is evil, cursed. If you touch him, misfortune will follow you." The words fell like heavy stones. Mr. Bafur froze, his hand hovering above the calabash. He looked from the man before him to the faces watching with fear and suspicion. For a moment, fear and doubt clouded his heart. Could this man truly be cursed? Was he risking trouble by helping? He glanced back at Amoah's eyes, tired, pleading, but still full of life. The pain and hope in that gaze shook him deeply. Slowly, with a sigh, Mr. Bafur pulled his hand back. He turned and walked away without a word, his heart heavy with regret. Amoah watched quietly, pain and sadness filling his chest. He understood the fear that kept people away, but the loneliness cut deeper than any bite. That evening, as the village settled into the quiet of night, Mr. Bafour sat in his guest room, unable to forget the man at the roadside. His wife, Amoah, noticed his troubled face and asked gently, "What is wrong?" Mr. Bafour looked at her, the city lights casting soft shadows across his face. "There is a man in the village, Amoah. He has been cursed by the people, left to suffer alone." Amoah nodded, her eyes kind and understanding. "I have heard his story, a strong man brought low by misfortune, but not evil." "Yet fear rules their hearts," Mr. Bafour said quietly. "I almost helped him today, but the village's words stopped me." Amoah reached out and took his hand. "Sometimes the bravest choice is to trust your heart, even when others do not." Those words stayed with Mr. Bafour long into the night. He thought about Amoah's strength, his courage, and the silent hope burning inside him. The next morning, he made a decision. He would return for Amoah, not as a rich man offering coins, but as a friend offering hope. The black SUV rolled smoothly into the village, its shiny body reflecting the bright sunlight and the curious eyes of villagers who had never seen such a car before. The engine purred quietly, like a sleeping lion, and as it came to a stop, two men stepped out, dressed neatly in clothes that smelled of the city and success. Their footsteps echoed softly on the dusty ground as they approached the thin figure sitting by the roadside. Amoah looked up, his eyes wide with surprise and a flicker of hope. It had been so long since anyone had come to help, and even longer since he felt the touch of kindness. "Are you Amoah?" one of the men asked gently. "Yes," Amoah croaked, his voice weak but clear. Without hesitation, the men lifted him carefully, their hands steady and warm. The villagers watched from a distance, whispering in confusion and fear. "Who are they?" asked a woman. "Maybe police," guessed a young man. "No, they look like city people. But what do they want with him?" whispered an old woman. Amoah felt the dust and heat leave him as the men helped him into the cool car. The soft cushions, the gentle hum of the engine. It was a world away from the roadside, where he had spent endless days and nights. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a room larger than his small house. The walls were clean and painted bright white, and the air smelled fresh and sweet. A soft bed cradled his tired body, and a table nearby held a plate of food, steaming jollof rice, fried fish, ripe plantains, smells and tastes he had dreamed of for months. Tears welled in Amoah's eyes as memories of hunger and of pain and loneliness flooded him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he was safe, cared for, and fed. Days passed. Doctors visited regularly, their faces kind and patient. They examined his leg, feeling the muscles and joints weakened by poison and neglect. They gave him medicine, powerful and strange, but it worked. Slowly, very slowly, Amoah began to move. At first, it was just small movements in his toes, then his feet, then his knees. Each tiny victory was a battle won, a hope restored. Mr. Bafour visited often, always smiling gently. "You are stronger than you know," he told Amoah one day. "We will help you walk again." Amoah nodded, swallowing his pride. It was hard to accept help, but his body ached for it. The exercises were difficult and painful. His muscles screamed as he tried to stand, to balance, to take a single step. Sometimes he fell, frustration and despair threatening to swallow him whole. But then there was Amoah. Amoah was a kind woman with eyes that shone like stars and a smile that warmed the coldest heart. She came to visit Amoah often, bringing fresh fruit and stories from the city. She listened to his dreams, his fears, and his silent prayers. They laughed together, shared quiet moments, and slowly a bond grew, gentle and steady like the rising sun. With Amoah's help, Amoah's strength returned. One morning, as the first light touched the window, he stood without help. Then took a step, then another. Tears of joy streamed down his face. In time, their friendship blossomed into love. It was simple, true, and healing. They married in a small ceremony filled with music and dancing. Amoah wore a clean white shirt, and Amoah's hands were decorated with henna. Friends and family came to celebrate the man who had risen from despair. Soon after, they were blessed with two children, a boy and a girl who filled their home with laughter and light. Amoah's heart, once heavy with pain, overflowed with joy. Though the past still whispered at the edges of his mind, Amoah knew he was no longer alone. He had a family, a home, and hope. He was ready to face whatever the future held. Years had passed since Amoah had been the broken man sitting by the roadside in Asuboa. Time had healed his body, but more importantly, it had mended his spirit. With Amma by his side and their two children laughing in the warmth of their home, Amoah had built a new life filled with hope, love, and purpose. Yet there was one place that remained in his heart, the village that had once called him cursed, that had abandoned him in his time of greatest need. One clear morning, as the sun painted the sky with strokes of gold and pink, Mr. Bafour arrived with an idea. His eyes sparkled with determination. "Amoah," he said gently, "it is time for you to return home. The village needs to see the man you have become." Amoah's heart fluttered with a mixture of hope and fear. What if the villagers still held on to their old fears? What if the shame and rejection had not faded? But deep down, Amoah knew he could no longer run from his past. It was part of his story, a story of pain, courage, and above all, change. So, together with Mr. Bafour, Amma, and their children, Amoah prepared for the journey back to Asuboa. As the convoy of shiny cars approached the village, villagers gathered at the edges, their eyes wide with curiosity and disbelief. The once familiar dirt roads now seemed smaller, narrower under the weight of unspoken questions. When Mr. Bafour stepped forward and called out, "Where is Amoah?" the crowd murmured uncertainly. "We chased him away long ago," an elder spoke cautiously. "He was cursed, evil, no good could come from him." Mr. Bafour smiled warmly. "Then look again." From the convoy stepped a tall, proud man dressed in a fine suit, walking steadily beside a graceful woman and two joyful children. The crowd gasped. This was no longer the broken figure they had left behind. Amoah met their eyes with calm dignity. "It is me," he said simply. For a long moment, silence stretched between the villagers and Amoah, a silence thick with shock, shame, and confusion. Some lowered their heads in regret, others wiped tears quietly. One by one, people began to approach. Old friends who had abandoned him now reached out with trembling hands. Mothers who had whispered warnings now offered apologies. Children who had laughed at him stood quietly, ashamed. Amoah listened with a heart open to healing. He did not speak words of anger or blame. Instead, he said softly, "What you called evil was pain and misfortune. But misfortune can change, just as people can." Then he shared food and drinks with the villagers. His first gift, a symbol of peace and new beginnings. The drums began to beat, children danced, and laughter returned to Asuboa, stronger than ever before. Amoah's return was more than a homecoming. It was a powerful reminder that suffering does not define a person. Strength lies in rising, forgiving, and moving forward. That night, under the vast African sky, Amoah sat with Amma and their children outside the small house he had once called home. The stars shimmered like blessings above. Amoah smiled and whispered, "This is where my story began, and this is where it continues." Amma squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with pride. The village of Asuboa had learned a valuable lesson, that kindness and courage can heal even the deepest wounds. And Amoah, once called evil, had become the heart of a community reborn.